Sometimes competitive racing can be fun. Other times, it can divide households. I'm Mark from Digital Dissection. I am personally not the best kart driver out there, and today we're looking back to Super Mario Kart. Before we get hit by a shell just before the finish line, be sure to subscribe and click the bell to be notified of new videos and more pop culture content on this channel, where we're always dissecting. 1992 is 32 years ago as of the making of this video. For some of us, that means it's time to schedule a colonoscopy. But in terms of video games, it meant the debut of the fourth best-selling Super Nintendo game, and that being Super Mario Kart, a game that some still think is the best karting experience ever made. It's hard to believe the series has existed over 3 decades already, spanning 14 titles across home consoles, handhelds, arcade games, and a mobile phone counterpart. In the early 90s, however, racing wasn't exactly mastered on home consoles quite yet, as racing games were typically more suited for arcade platforms, but the Super Nintendo actually had an early contender for the home market called F-Zero. In this racing game, the player controls a hover car in a futuristic setting of the year 2560. F-Zero was actually a launch title for the Super Nintendo, and impressed both reviewers and gamers alike, as it had impressive visuals built on the Mode 7 graphics mode. This allowed for background layers that create depth and wrapping effects. Now there's actually a reason why we're mentioning so much of F-Zero. It would be the essential prototype for Super Mario Kart, as Mode 7 allowed for the possibilities of a karting world to even exist. However, Mario Kart didn't actually begin as Mario Kart at all, but rather to take a concept like F-Zero and allow for 2 players to race each other on the screen at the same time. Naturally, this idea funneled through Nintendo producer Shigeru Miyamoto, possible immortal video game demigod. There were a few challenges facing directors Tadashi Sugiyama and Hideki Kono to achieve Shigeru's vision. F-Zero as a racing concept was visually quite complex, as its fast action took up the entire screen, and its routes required a fair amount of skill to navigate. Translating such things to their karting concept required them to simplify into a split-screen concept, as it would not be possible to allow for 2 players to essentially play F-Zero together. There were quite a few hardware limitations at the time, which would lead to the player's screen being split. In terms of prototypes though, as we mentioned earlier, karting wasn't actually designed to be a Mario game at first. It featured a generic placeholder character until developers wanted to see how racers would appear when they passed each other. And it was a few months into development that Mario was first used to show that concept. Needless to say, they didn't exactly look back after this decision, as inviting Super Mario also meant bringing some of his friends, like Princess Peach, Toad, Yoshi, and even Bowser, to get behind the wheel with him. In terms of actual gameplay, Mario Kart really offered an experience that was unlike anything else possible on home consoles at the time. Producers of the game wanted to not only make a format that was accessible to everyone, but one that felt like a plug-and-play style of experience. Growing up, this was absolutely how I viewed the game, as we didn't actually own a Super Nintendo. We were an NES and Sega Genesis household. It was kind of confusing from a branding perspective. However, due to this, I didn't actually spend intense amounts of time with Mario Kart until much later in my life. What I did come to appreciate early on, however, was its many different modes, as it broke down into a traditional racing cup-based competition, but it also featured time trials, head-to-head races, and a battle mode. For many of us, this meant writing down best times on a sheet of paper in the 90s and trying to best our friends before the sleepover ended. But it also meant fully appreciating the game's many power-ups that made many aspects of Mario Kart potentially volatile and competitive no matter what position you held going into the final lap. Many know the Mario Kart franchise for its ability to fire a blue shell at the first-place racer and stop them momentarily. Fortunately, the 1992 version didn't have this just yet. It's true, we were in the Stone Age. No internet either. Overall, though, power-ups really set apart Mario Kart, not just from other racing games, but managing them effectively was what made each race unique. And this extends into stacking the right ones to access the many shortcuts that some of us abused. Used seldomly. Yeah, let's go with that. Personally, though, I actually hate many competitive gaming experiences, particularly those held within racing. Am I jealous of those who mastered Mario Kart, like my neighbors who owned it and routinely handed me my ass every time? Yeah, kind of. However, even with this consistent abuse, Mario Kart still allows a level of spontaneity that can consistently change the experience no matter how a race might be shaking out. If you're in last place consistently, you might just want to try another game. Unless you're into that sort of thing. But to even those of average gaming prowess, Mario Kart's power-ups were fun to obtain over the course of a race, as you still had to be skillful enough to figure out the nuances of turning and strategically braking. But your next power-up could easily transform a tight race into a podium-making performance. Now, there's still an important question to ask in the midst of the intense reputation Super Mario Kart still has to this day. Why do so many consider this to be the best Mario Kart experience, even now? Nostalgia for many, of course, is a major determining factor, but there's other things to consider here too. I personally love the game's impact as a turning point for the Mario franchise because it did two important things. One, it's now become the monolith moment for karting as a concept, and created a wave of competitors, wannabes, and a string of successes that made Mario Karting a staple for each Nintendo console from this point on. And two, it also helped showcase the Super Nintendo's capabilities in the 16-bit era, proving that Mode 7 could provide layering in a way that made sprite-driven movements look 3D, where true 3D graphics were not actually possible on a hardware level. Now, whether or not these make Super Mario the best in the series, well, I'd be first to say that's not a compelling case. What makes it great is that it extends the Mario universe beyond what we initially thought was possible for the franchise, as Mario Kart borrows assets heavily from the Super Mario World game. And as I navigated its 20 tracks, and many locales that came straight from the 1990 hit, it was a great reminder how much fun you can have racing and platforming. Expanding the franchise, however, are the key words for me, as the concept of racing isn't exactly new to anyone. But functions like the battle mode of Super Mario Kart, where it's not about racing, but using power-ups to knock out other players, is what helped many people, including me, to adopt the game, as it showed that not all competitions are about crossing a finish line first. What I think the biggest takeaway from Super Mario Kart might be, however, is that there might be many technical and skill-based roadblocks in the way for gamers to adopt racing games. For at least this series, however, you always have a fighting chance. But as always, thank you for watching this retrospective as we revisited Mario Kart. Stay tuned for more retrospectives on this channel, and if you want to see us tackle one of your favorite games, we're always open to suggestions. Don't forget to subscribe for more content, and until next time, pop culture nerds, keep on dissecting.